Hey there, everyone, and welcome back to Utility Sports. Today, we're going to be talking about some Orlando Magic basketball and going through an off-season preview. This is a series we've been doing with a number of lottery teams throughout this process because there's a few teams that I think are really big pivot teams throughout the draft and free agency that I think have a lot of impact on the shaping of the league. But before we jump into that, I just want to urge you guys to hit that subscribe button really quickly. It's absolutely free to you. Takes about 2 seconds of your time, and it would mean a lot to have your support here at Utility Sports. And also smash that like button if you are enjoying the content that we've been posting. Now, without further ado, let's actually jump into the video here and talk about what the Orlando Magic have already done this offseason, bringing in Jamahl Mosley as their new head coach. For those of you who do not know, I myself am a Dallas Mavericks fan, and of course, Jamahl Mosley was an assistant on Rick Carlisle's staff. And was a phenomenal assistant, and one game that Rick Carlisle can coach because of COVID complications, he actually won. So in his head coaching career, he is 1-0 currently before coming to the Orlando Magic, and I love this move for the Orlando Magic. I think he's a phenomenal young coach who's going to get a lot of good rapport with his players. He's built a lot of really strong relationships throughout his time in the NBA, coached over in Cleveland for a little bit, and then spent a majority of the recent years in Dallas. And a lot of players really love him. I think this is really, really good for Orlando. He's a great X's and O's coach. He understands how the game is played and how the game is won. At the end of the day, I trust him to be a top young coach in the NBA, and I think he's going to be someone that the Orlando Magic, 5 to 10 years down the road from now, are going to be so thankful that they hired him when they did. I think he was a fantastic hire. I think he fits perfectly with this Magic rebuild. You're looking at someone who's going to be able to take advantage of X's and O's in the pick and roll, do a lot of different things that you're looking for in a head coach, including building those relationships. And I just want to say real quickly too, everything that the Orlando Magic have done the last 6 months, in my books, has been W's. They've been making the right moves, trading Evan Fournier for second round picks, trading Nikola Vucevic to the Bulls. That was a fantastic move that's really set this franchise up for some success here, especially in this such a strong draft. Having 2 top 8 picks, that's awesome for the Orlando Magic. They also have another future first from that trade, and also trading Aaron Gordon when they did. They just put the rebuild into motion at the exact right time, and I think Orlando has a very bright future. So now jumping into what their current roster looks like to kind of talk about that future. Well, of course, they got Markelle Fultz at the point guard position. Once he's healthy, he's going to be probably their best player. Looking at Gary Harris there too at this point, 27 years old already. Doesn't have a lot of values in the final year of his contract next season. I just don't think that he really factors into the long-term roster standpoint, but I also don't think he's going to have a lot of mobility in trade talks just because he's at a high number and hasn't really had his career pan out the way that many thought it would have 5-6 years ago when he was a young kid for the Denver Nuggets. Now, Jonathan Isaac, another guy who they have to get healthy, but I think this is one of the best defensive players in the NBA. I've been very vocal about that for about 3-4 seasons now, that he is the most versatile defender. You can really put him on centers, actually. He went out and guarded Kristaps Porzingis the entire game against the Mavericks oftentimes. So he can switch on to 7'3" guys. In other games, he's taken point guards. There's not a lot of guys who can do that. Jonathan Isaac is a very special player on the defensive end of the floor. Chuma Okeke in his rookie season was fairly impressive. I like what he brings. Wendell Carter Jr., he's kind of a swing player on this team right now. I'm not exactly sure what to expect for him for the future. I think the hiring of Jamahl Mosley maybe will help him develop in his career a little bit. He's going to be a key guy to watch. Dwayne Bacon was a nice addition in free agency last offseason. Cole Anthony, a very interesting player as well to me, along with RJ Hampton in their backcourt along depth positions. Terrence Ross is a name to watch this offseason. We'll talk about him a little bit later on in the video. Mo Bamba hasn't had his career really take off yet to this point, but again, he's only about 22 years old. Give him a couple more years, we'll see what he becomes. And Michael Carter-Williams, just going to be a depth guard, honestly, at this point. Don't see a lot of him, but those are the 11 guys that are under contract at this point. Now let's look at some key cap holds as well for this team. Of course, you have the 2 draft picks there at the bottom of the graphic, pick 5 and pick 8. Those cap holds are going to be key for this team rebuilding. That's going to be the money slot for those players. But then you also have some other key players here as well. Otto Porter Jr., who came over in the Chicago Bulls trade. His cap hold is $33.72 million. Now, if you're Orlando, there's one reason and one reason only on why you would hold on to that cap hold, and that is to try and negotiate a sign and trade centered around Otto Porter in free agency. He's probably going to get a contract anywhere between $8 to $12 million with an NBA team, I would guess. And it would be really nice for them if they're able to say, hey, we'll attach a second round pick down the road if you make this a sign and trade. So they give up a second round pick and open up a trade exception and move like that. That's why they would hold on to that cap hold. Currently, they're not going to be slated to have real cap space either. So holding on to his cap hold really doesn't hurt you, because at the end of the day, if nothing comes to fruition with that, you could always just renounce it down the line. James Ennis, the third, he's the key player on this graphic here at $6.27 million. He's a guy that's going to have real suitors in free agency. He's going to have a big market. A lot of guys are going to be, a lot of teams, a lot of executives are going to be looking at James Ennis as a guy who, hey, we could bring him in. He could play some real meaningful minutes for us in playoff basketball as a 3-and-D wing with some athletic upside. That's how a lot of people are going to be looking at James Ennis. When he was in Houston, he was getting a lot of that run. And I think he's going to be a valuable player this free agency. So he'll be a key guy for them to hold that cap hold on and maybe negotiate a sign and trade there. Iggy Brazdeikis at that $1.889 million. That's an obvious retain on the cap hold there. And Mo Wagner as well. You have some young players then who, maybe you see a little bit of development in, and then maybe they become part of your future long term. Or you could flip them down the road for other assets. So now let's look at the NBA draft, because that's really where everything hinges on this Orlando Magic team. Right now, who are some draft targets at picks 5 and 8 for the Orlando Magic? Well, you got Scottie Barnes, who I think is the very top target for them, assuming Jalen Suggs is off the board. My guess at this point is picks 1 through 4 will go Cade Cunningham, Jalen Green, Evan Mobley, and also then Jalen Suggs. I think the only question mark in there is, will Cleveland stay at 3 or will they trade down? I think that they really love Jonathan Kuminga. But if Jonathan Kuminga is on the board, I could also see the Magic going with him in that route. You're also looking at James Bouknight here as an option at 5 and 8. Moses Moody, Alperen Şengün, Corey Kispert, Josh Giddey, and Keon Johnson are some of the other targets that I think will be on Orlando's radar. They've worked out a lot of these guys, brought them in for private workouts. So those will be key guys to watch. Looking at option 1 now during the draft is you go best player at 5 and best fit at 8, which I really, really like this option, because to me, the best player at 5 is going to be Scottie Barnes. I love what Scottie Barnes brings. As a player, he's big, lengthy, has a 7'2" wingspan, a really good feel for the game. He's growing as a passer, was asked to play point guard for the Florida State Seminoles this past year. Hasn't ever done that before. He was on that Mount Verde Academy team with Cade Cunningham. So, of course, Cade was playing the point guard position for that high school team. And Scottie Barnes came in, played point guard at 6'9", and didn't miss a beat. He was very, very effective in that role, showed real playmaking touch. And I think his offensive game, give him a few years, it could come along a little bit as a half-court scorer, especially around the rim. Now, his three-point shot, I think, a little bit of a big question for me at this point. But at the same time, Barnes affects the game in so many other ways that I don't think it's necessarily going to be a problem. And then at pick 8, you go between the options of Moses Moody or James Bouknight. The nice option here with Moody is he's a year younger than Bouknight, and he also played on that Mount Verde Academy team with Scottie Barnes. So you have that little storyline there of 2 high school teammates getting reunited there in the state of Florida with the Orlando Magic. I really like that a lot. But also James Bouknight has a really high ceiling. I think his floor is fairly high as well as a half-court scorer. And the Orlando Magic badly need that. If you take Scottie Barnes 5th overall, you need to add some other scoring into this lineup. So Moody and Bouknight become the obvious answers at those spots. Then option 2 here, you go best scorer at 5 and best scorer at 8, because this team, I'm just going to be honest with you guys, still does need a lot of scoring. So at pick 5, that could be Jonathan Kuminga, who I think has more scoring upside than Scottie Barnes, if I'm being completely honest. More comfortable handling the rock as a scorer, someone who's comfortable rising up in transition. Doesn't really have the feel of a passer like Scottie Barnes does, but if you're Orlando, you're probably looking for a little bit of half-court offensive juice, and Kuminga has that. Also at pick 8, you could go with someone like Alperen Şengün, who probably doesn't have a lot of fan support right now, because I think a lot of Magic fans probably want to see what their young center core of Bamba, Wendell Carter ends up looking like. But I think Şengün is one of the more polished prospects in this process. He's playing in the top 5 league in the world, a men's league, and was very, very successful, averaged 19 points a game. Great footwork down the low block. I think he's going to come in and be an instant bucket off the bench if they choose to use him that way, or could be a starting level center on day 1. And then also James Bouknight again here, another just really good scoring option. Put the ball in the hole a lot for UConn. Even dropped a 40 piece on Creighton during the season. So you're looking at another guy who can come in and score the ball in the half court. Or option 3, you go with 2 high upside selections. Again, that's Scottie Barnes here at pick 5. I think he is a really high upside player just based off of his physical tools, his athleticism, and also his ability to pass the basketball at his size. And then at pick 8, you have Alperen Şengün, who I think, again, has a very high ceiling. He can stretch out to the three-point line. Again, great footwork down in the low block. If he gets a little bit more mobility, they work really hard on his body, he could end up being one of the best picks from this year's draft. So those are the top 3 options. Let me know in the comments which option you prefer. If you prefer option 1, option 2, or option 3, Magic fans, I'd love to hear from you. Then moving into what free agency actually will look like here for this team. So there is a key element to this. They don't really have cap space. So they're going to have to be creative in finding ways to swing a sign and trade. That could be guys for like Kelly Oubre, who is probably leaving the Warriors this offseason. I think he's an interesting fit into this roster. You know, he's only 25 years old yet at this point. He's not an old player by any means. Duncan Robinson, who's actually older than Kelly Oubre, still would be a really good fit because this Magic team needs some shooting, especially if you go with Scottie Barnes at pick 5. You need to put some guys around him that can score the basketball, can shoot it from deep, and really stretch that floor. I think Duncan Robinson answers the call at all those areas and offers pretty good height at 6'7". Now, he's not the most physical defender, but if you're trotting a lineup with Scottie Barnes, with Wendell Carter and Jonathan Isaac as your other players in the front court, you've got a lot of defense. You just need a little bit more shooting touch. Malik Monk, a guy who kind of found his rhythm this past year for the Charlotte Hornets. I think he's one of the key players in free agency, honestly, because some teams here like the Orlando Magic, who aren't really ready to be NBA contenders yet, they're going to be looking for guys that, hey, maybe there's a big boom ahead of them. And Malik Monk took a massive step forward with the addition of LaMelo Ball this past season for the Hornets. Shot over 40% from 3. I think that was the biggest surprise to everyone about his game. And just really emerged as a half-court scorer like many had thought he could be when he got drafted out of Kentucky a few years ago. Justice Winslow, probably on the lower end here of the interest just because of how injury-riddled his career has been at this point. But again, if you're trying to find guys who have upside in free agency that you're going to be able to acquire for cheap, I think he makes a lot of sense. And Josh Hart as well, someone who rebounds the basketball, puts a lot of energy in on the defensive end of the floor. I think he would be a nice little upgrade off the bench for this Magic roster. And then also, key thing here is use the mid-level exception to try and add a little bit more talent. Maybe bring in another front court player to kind of give you some depth there. The backcourt has some decent depth at this point. I think the front court could just use a little bit. And then also try and recoup assets for James Ennis III if and when he signs elsewhere. I think that's going to be really key. Trying to swing a sign and trade, which is also going to be really good. Maybe take in a little bit of salary from a team that, hey, we can't afford James Ennis outright, but we would love to add him. Will you take this contract back, especially if we give you a couple second-round picks or something along those lines? I think that would be really key for Orlando to try and maximize what their roster currently has and build off of that moving forward. Now, what are some other key offseason goals here for this Orlando Magic roster and this Orlando Magic franchise? To me, they have to look at building some continuity. If we're going to be honest, this Magic franchise, since the departure of Dwight Howard, just hasn't had a ton of continuity. Nikola Vucevic was probably the key piece of continuity there, and they moved on from him. I think they did it at the right time, but now you have to look at trying to build that continuity back up with Jamal Mosley to be their long-term coach, regardless of win and loss record his first 3-4 seasons of his coaching career, because this Magic team's just not ready to compete at the highest level yet. If they're losing games, it's not because Jamal Mosley's a bad coach, it's because they're going through a little bit of a roster rebuild, and I think they're going to have that long leash with Mosley and realize, hey, our team's just not ready to compete at a high level. We're going to look to build around you with you being our cornerstone at that head coaching spot. Then also, they have to look to ship Terrence Ross. I think if they look to move him in a sign-and-trade deal, or they bring in another player, someone like Malik Monk, I think that the Hornets would have interest in bringing back Terrence Ross in that. Or you could also look at, maybe like a move with the Warriors. If you bring in Kelly Oubre, you get a little bit younger on that wing position. Terrence Ross is 30 years old already. I think the Warriors would value Terrence Ross coming off the bench. There's a few other teams as well that I think is going to have a lot of interest in Terrence Ross. And then the other key is get key players back healthy. Markelle, Fultz, Jonathan Isaac, they're 2 best players on this roster at this point. Going out with ACLs this past 12 months has been really tough for this team. But I think that they're going to be moving in the right direction with those 2 back, and then picks 5 and 8. They also have pick 33 in the draft, so there's a lot to build on here. If you're the Orlando Magic, they should have their head up high and be very excited about the future here. Let me know in the comments who you want in the draft if you're an Orlando Magic fan, and who you would like in free agency. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. Thanks again so much for watching. Hopefully you are enjoying the offseason previews. Hit that like button if you are, and we'll catch you in the very next video.